Welcome everybody to our Q&A session today on CCNA and CCNP. I'm Keith Bogart. As it mentioned in the advertisements, I'm the one who will be doing my best to take your questions and provide you some useful answers here. In the event that I don't get to everybody's question and you have an outstanding question after we're done, let me just show you real quickly here my contact information, and then we can just take it from there. So you can see here, there's a variety of ways you can reach out to me. There is my email address. I'll go ahead and make this just a little bit larger for you. You can also reach out to me at Twitter, and you can reach out to me via LinkedIn. So I'm always available, and if I'm not teaching a boot camp or a class, I'm always here to do my best to answer your question and do some research if I don't know the immediate answer to that. So with that being the case, let's just go ahead and jump right into it now. Well, I've got you guys for an hour, so I'll do the best I can to answer the various questions you have. And once again, the questions that we're really looking for are questions pertaining to the routing and switching exams of either the CCNA or the CCNP. And of course, the CCNP is 3 exams, the route, the switch, and the T-shoot. And the CCNA is either 2 exams, the ICND-1 and ICND-2, or the composite exam. So with that, let me just start looking at what you guys are typing in here and see what I can do. Let's see here. So somebody says, do you think that Cisco needs to address the gap between the CCNP and the CCIE? That would be nice. Yeah, there is quite a significant gap between getting your CCNP, and forget even about the CCIE lab. There's even a huge gap between the CCNP, which are written exams, and the CCIE written exam. There's a lot of material that you never even get exposed to until you get to the CCIE written level. For example, multicasting. You don't learn anything about multicasting until you get to the CCIE level. This thing called the Embedded Event Manager, and if you don't know anything about scripting, that's going to be kind of difficult for you. QoS. There's a tiny little bit of QoS you have to know for the CCNP route. Virtually nothing. But they hit you real hard with QoS at the CCIE level. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff that's not covered between the CCNP that you have to learn once you get to the CCIE level. And even within the CCNP exams, with the topics they do cover, for example, OSPF and EIGRP and BGP, there's a whole nother level you have to get to be able to answer the CCIE written questions as well as do the lab stuff on those topics. So yeah, there's a pretty good gap there. What about the gap between the CCNA and the CCNP? That gap is smaller. That gap is a lot smaller, and there is definitely a valid reason why for the CCNP you have to have an active CCNA. And let me just clarify that for a second. So you can go and you can sign up for route, switch, and T-shoot without any CCNA. You can sign up for the test, you can pass the test. It's just that you won't officially get your CCNP certification until you have an active CCNA. You can still go out and take the tests, you just won't get the certification for it. So the CCNP exams absolutely follow on top of the CCNA exams. Now, with switch, there's a lot of overlap with what you'll see in switch and what you learned at the CCNA level regarding switching topics. There's a lot of overlap there. There's a lot of new stuff too, but there's a lot of overlap. That is not so much the case with route. So with route, the routing topics absolutely build on what you learned with the routing topics at the CCNA, but there's not nearly as much of an overlap there. Let's see here. What other questions? There was a question here from Tiger Waves. So Tiger Waves, you say, hi Keith, for this I'm more interested in the reasoning. Let's see here, did you give me a question earlier? No. Okay, so I guess is it. The reasoning to get the answer than the actual answer. The reasoning to get the answer rather than the actual answer. Okay. Would you typically do IPsec over GRE or GRE over IPsec? Well, GRE is your tunnel mechanism. The whole reason you would, so let's ignore IPsec for the moment and just focus on GRE. Actually, let's forget about GRI and just focus on the concept of a tunnel, right? So when you've got two devices, let's just say two routers, and you want to build a tunnel between them, let's just say GRE tunnel for the purposes of argument, why do you build a tunnel in the first place? Well, it's because these routers are getting some kind of data like, for example, IPv6 packets, let's just say, and these routers are not directly connected. There's other stuff in the middle. There's a whole other network in the middle, and that network in the middle does not natively handle, it can't natively transport what these two routers want to exchange between each other. So for example, if I've got an IPv6 packet coming in on one router, but the network in the middle is IPv4 only, I can't natively send IPv6 through an IPv4 only network. The devices in the middle there don't understand the addressing, they don't understand the packet headers, it can't get through. And yet I need that protocol to get to this other device over here. So that's when you need to implement a tunnel. And a tunnel, all a tunnel really is at a very high level is that when this protocol comes in like IPv6, you say, okay, the network in the middle doesn't support IPv6. What does it support? Well, it supports IPv4. All right, so what a tunnel will simply do is take your IPv6 packet or whatever it is, maybe it's a CLNS packet or something that the network in the middle doesn't support. It'll take that and just put on a new header. It'll put on a new header that the network in the middle does understand. Like in this case, we're just putting on an IPv4 header. And that way we can get it through that network to this other router over here, which can then strip off that header, and now you've been able to tunnel. So that's the whole reason we need a tunnel. Now, let's add IPsec onto that. If you are worried that as that packet is going through that network, and once again, we're just talking about an IPv4 network here, if you're concerned that as the packet's going through, somebody might sniff it, they might be able to eavesdrop on it, and you don't want them to be able to tell what it is. Or you're afraid they might, maybe you're not so much concerned that they can tell what it is, but you don't want them changing it, right? Like for example, if it's a banking update, probably don't want them to see the banking update, but I also don't want them to change any of the bits in the banking update. If I'm doing a banking deposit for $1,000 and on the other end, because it's been modified in the middle, the guy who's receiving it thinks I'm only doing a deposit for $10 because somebody changed some of the bits, that's really going to tick me off. I don't want that to happen. So those are examples of where you would want to introduce IPsec. IPsec being, okay, if somebody does see this, I don't want them to have the ability to tamper with it. I don't want them to have the ability to even read what I'm sending. I want to encrypt it. I want to make it illegible to them. So you can do that with or without a tunnel. The two are sort of mutually exclusive for each other. Now, when you start learning about DMVPN, which is a concept that they introduce at the CCNP route level, you don't have to know how to configure it, you don't have to know how to troubleshoot it, but you just have to know, what it is at a high level, the protocols involved. You learn the DMVPN is typically a solution where customers will use the internet to connect sites together with GRE tunnels. Okay, so you've got your tunneling going there, but because it's going through the internet, which is highly insecure, you're probably going to want to use IPsec on top of that to encrypt your stuff so nobody can read it or change it. So tunneling and IPsec are not dependent on each other. They're independent of each other, but a lot of times people put them together simply because they want the stuff going through their tunnel safe. They want to secure it. But you don't have to do IPsec with GRE. It's completely independent. So hopefully that answered your question there, Tiger Waves. Let's see here. What other questions do we have? And as the questions come in here, I'm going to be scanning through and specifically looking for questions that are really related to the certifications, to the exams. And then if there's a lull in that, I'll go back. And so if you ask a question about, well, what's a good design here? Or what should an ISP do here? I will get to those questions, but my primary emphasis right now is on answering people's questions who are pursuing their CCNA or CCNP to make sure I get those questions answered first. All right, so just so you know there. So this last question here by Mikhail is a real good one. What would you recommend to prepare for the CCNA without real equipment? GNS3 or packet tracer? I would, if I had to choose between those two, I would probably choose Packet Tracer. And here's why. Packet Tracer has more switching features available in it than GNS3 does, and switching is a large part of the CCNA. So within GNS3, the switching you can do is very limited. Some of the big features like port security, can't do that in GNS3. You can do it in Packet Tracer. Now, one of the downsides to Packet Tracer, and this isn't really a huge deal at the CCNA level, it becomes a huge deal at the CCNP level, is that Packet Tracer is missing a bunch of commands. You know, Packet Tracer is not real Cisco iOS software. GNS3 is. So in order to run GNS3, you actually have to have some real Cisco iOS software. And for someone who's preparing for their CCNA, they might not have access to real Cisco iOS software. I mean, you could always steal it, but then you're running a risk by doing that, right? And I wouldn't recommend doing that. So if you don't have any legitimate access to Cisco iOS software, GNS3 is pretty much off the table. But if you do have access to Cisco iOS software, one of the benefits is if you're practicing stuff you can do on a router. Okay, so anything you can imagine that you can do on a router, access lists, IPv6, routing for IPv4 and IPv6, IP addressing, all that stuff. Anything you can do on a router, you can do in GNS3. And because GNS3 is running real Cisco iOS, all the commands are available to you there. So when you issue the question mark, you'll see every available option. If you type something in wrong, you'll actually see the error message that would really be displayed on a real router. That's not the case with Packet Tracer. With Packet Tracer, because it's a simulation, it's software that's written to look and feel like iOS, but it's not real iOS. There are some missing commands. For example, one of the things that's missing that irritates the heck out of me, because right now I'm designing an ICND2 workbook, and part of that is spanning tree labs. Well, if you learn about spanning tree, one of the big things you'll learn is cost. That everything is related to cost. You know, the path that's picked as the best path is the path with the least cost to the root bridge. You learn that. And you learn how to manipulate cost in spanning tree. Well, guess what? In Packet Tracer, you can't do that. There are no commands in Packet Tracer to manipulate the cost on an interface, which really limits what you can do with spanning tree. Don't know why that's not in there, but it's not. So that's an example of one command that's kind of a critical command that's missing from Packet Tracer. But as I've been going through Packet Tracer and developing labs and stuff on it, it seems to me that 90% of the commands you would need to know to pass your CCNA are in Packet Tracer for both routing and switching. Once again, I'm talking CCNA level here. So that's why I tend to refer people to Packet Tracer. Plus, it's absolutely free. You don't have to pay for it. It's a standalone program. You don't have to download anything else. Like with GNS3, you have to download Cisco iOS software to work with it. So for CCNA, I prefer Packet Tracer. It also has some bugs in it, unfortunately. You just have to get used to that stuff, but that would be my recommendation. As far as Viral is concerned, Cisco's Viral, I think that's sort of like GNS3. Like GNS3, Cisco's Viral uses real Cisco iOS, but it has a lot of the same downsides. Switching commands are very limited. So once again, for CCNA, a lot of the switching stuff you're not going to be able to do. It's really difficult to get it working in the first place, to get it all set up, to get it downloaded, to log into the server and all that stuff. So I think it's overly complex, especially for a CCNA person. It's not free. Packet Tracer and GNS3 are free. Viral, you have to pay a subscription to use that. So that'd be like third on my list after Packet Tracer and after GNS3. Let me scroll up here a little bit. I don't want to miss some of the older commands. So somebody says, I haven't run into bugs yet. What have you seen? So with regards to Packet Tracer, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. Some bugs I've seen, spanning tree bugs. Sometimes you'll correctly configure spanning tree and every single interface will be in the forwarding state, which means you have a bridging loop. Spanning tree is not supposed to do that, but I have seen that. And so I have to basically reload my Packet Tracer switches to get that out of there. Another bug I've seen with regards to trunking. As you learn about trunking, you learn that there is switch port mode trunk, which is to hard-code a trunk. There's also switch port mode dynamic. and dynamic auto and dynamic desirable, which also form trunks using Cisco's DTP protocol. Well, in a real switch, if I have an ether channel of 3 or 4 links, the ether channel could care less how the trunks within the ether channel were formed. Doesn't matter if you use switch port mode trunk, switch port mode dynamic. But in packet tracer, it does not seem to like it when you use switch port mode dynamic. The only way I've been able to get my ether channels up and functional and working is if I use switch port mode trunk. It doesn't like the dynamic auto or the dynamic desirable. So off the top of my head, those are the, if I think of any other bugs, I'll let you know, but those are the ones I can think of right now. Let's see here. Let me scroll up a little bit. A physical lab is also great if you can get access to real physical equipment. You don't really, now in order to pass your CCNA and even your CCNP, you don't need access to physical equipment, but there are some definite advantages. You know, I'm assuming that the whole reason you're pursuing these certifications is because you want to work in the networking industry. You want to work with routers and switches, and as such, there's certain things certain experience and certain things you can only learn if you have real access to equipment. For example, how are you ever going to learn how to connect your laptop to the console port of a router or switch and all the things that can go wrong in that process if you don't actually have a router or switch in front of you and a blue console cable? You know, you have to learn, okay, what drivers do I need to download on my laptop to get my USB port to work with that blue satin cable? What settings in hyperterminal, you know, what's the baud rate, what's the flow control I need to get that working? It's one thing to read about that stuff. It's a whole other thing to actually do it in person. Looking at the LEDs on a switch and saying, okay, well, these are flashing orange here, these are red, these are green. What does that mean? And if it's flashing really quickly or flashing really slowly, what does that mean? Once again, not necessarily stuff you would need to know to pass an exam, but stuff that's really useful to know in real life if you're dealing with real equipment. So, you know, if you can get your hands on a router and a couple switches, that would be useful to you. Let's see here. Let me scroll up a bit here, a little bit more, and just look for some random questions. And by the way, there's a lot of questions coming in, which is awesome. So if I don't get to your question, just repost it, and hopefully I'll see it as it comes along here. I also noticed before I started here, there was some back and forth about brain dumps and, you know, like and test dumps and stuff like that. And I want to address that. I actually got an email earlier today from someone asking me that same question. Should I use that stuff? First of all, let me preface it by saying, you know, that's a very personal question as far, you know, you have to personally answer that yourself, but here's my take on that. First of all, these exam dumps, these brain dumps, technically speaking, are illegal. They're illegal because what are they? They're people who went and took the exam. Maybe they snuck, you know, screenshots of the exam, but they're basically taking real questions and the real answers they saw and putting into these brain dumps. And that is illegal. That is against Cisco's policy. And if they find that you've created a brain dump or you have used a brain dump, they can technically bar you from getting a certification. So you can really bite yourself by doing that. Now, maybe you're thinking, oh yeah, but you know, what's the likelihood of that? What's the likelihood that they're gonna know that I used a brain dump? All right, maybe the likelihood is small. That's probably true. But here's the other thing. Let's look at it from a practical standpoint. Once again, I'm assuming that you're pursuing your CCNA or CCNP because you want to apply for a job. You want to get a job as a network admin or network engineer. If you look at a brain dump and you just memorize a bunch of questions and answers there, and then you go and pass your exam like that, what's going to happen when you go into your interview? And a lot of times in these interviews, they will ask you technical questions. They may even ask you to get on a router or switch, and they'll say, hey, configure EIGRP for me and do some filtering between these two routers here. I want to see if you can do it. You're going to have a deer in the headlights look because all you know are the questions that you memorized in the brain dump. And you're going to look like an absolute idiot during that interview process. All right, let's say that you managed to get through the interview. Okay, you lucked out. You weren't asked technical questions, or the technical questions you were asked happen to be the ones you memorized in the brain dump. Now you're working as a network admin. What's going to happen now? they're going to ask you to do something, you're not going to know how to do it. Or it's going to take you an inordinate amount of time to do it because you got to look everything up. Or a network outage is going to happen, or some sort of crisis is going to happen. A crisis that a CCNA or CCNP who really studied for the exam, who really learned the technology, should be able to handle and overcome in just a few minutes. You're going to be sweating, pulling out your hair because you're going to have no idea. You are, basically what I'm trying to say is, if you pass an exam because you memorize a bunch of brain dumps, you're not really a CCNA. You're not really a CCNP. You don't have the knowledge to claim that credential. And if you somehow sneak in and get a job doing that stuff, you're going to struggle, you're going to look bad, and your company's not going to like you too much. And then just thirdly, it's also an issue of ethics and morals. There's people out there who are studying like crazy. When you get your CCNP or your CCNA, you want that feeling of pride. You want that feeling walking out of the test of, man, I studied really hard. I put in a lot of hours, a lot of time, a lot of work. I know this stuff. And this paper right here proves that I know it. I got this because I studied hard for it. If you walk out and you've got this because you cheated, because you memorized a bunch of questions from a brain dump, what does this really mean? How are you going to get any pride out of this? You're not. So, ultimately it's your own choice, but I would really recommend you stay away from the brain dumps. I recognize the tests are expensive. I do. And I know that, for someone saying, man, if, for example, the CCNP route exam, $300 US. If you're looking at that because you got to retake it 2 or 3 times, that can quickly add up. And I can see how there'd be a big temptation to look at a brain dump in advance so you can pass on the first try. I know money's tight, but I would really recommend staying away from that stuff. It's just not right to do that. So what else do we have here? What else can I speak to? Somebody's asking which CCNP cert is most in demand, security, data center, collaboration, etc. I think right now, probably security and data center would be pretty even. Maybe a little bit more for data center. Well, I don't know. Security is in a lot of demand too, but I would say either security or data center, you'd be well positioned with either one of those. Let's see here. Another question, how can I practice troubleshooting? There's a variety of ways for that. So when I'm doing labs myself, I like to, once I learn what's required to get something to work. For example, let's say that you're learning OSPF, and you're learning that in order to get 2 routers to form an OSPF adjacency, there's some things that have to match up. They both have to agree that this link has to be in the same area. They both have to have the exact same timers. If using authentication, the authentication has to match up. Okay, well certainly, you want to do a lab and you want to get them working like that. But a lot of times when I'm reading that stuff, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder what would happen if I intentionally screw that up. What am I going to see if their OSPF areas are not the same? What am I going to see if their timers are not the same? Am I going to get syslog messages? Am I going to get any kind of indicators at all? Do a debug OSPF question mark or debug IP OSPF question mark. What debugs are available? Play around with them. See what kind of output that you get. And always make sure, key indicator here, whenever you do a debug, especially if it's a debug you're not familiar with and you're not exactly sure how much output is going to be a result of that, make sure you don't log your debugs to the console port. You could accidentally lock yourself out. Always when doing a debug, type in no logging console debug and then logging buffer debug. You want to make sure that your debugs go to the buffer where you can view them safely. Don't have them logged to the console. But that's one thing I would do to do troubleshooting, is intentionally try to break things and see what would happen as a result of that. Now another thing you can do, and I'm going to bring this up here, and it's not just, well, I guess it is a little bit of shameless marketing, but it's also, so let me go over here and bring this up. If you go to, if you're not already a member of INE, you can become a member. It's free to become a member. You'll just have to submit your username and password and email address. And once you become a member of INE, once again, let me stress that is free, then you can go in here and now you have to pay for this, but we have workbooks. And as far as troubleshooting is concerned, one of the workbooks we have is the CCNP T-Shoot workbook. Now, of course, this is specific to the CCNP level here. But if you use the CCNP T-Shoot workbook and you also rent time on the CCNP racks we have, you can go into these tickets. And when you open up a ticket, it'll tell you to load a particular pre-config, like you see right here, right? Load the T-Shoot Ticket 1 initial configuration. And that, by loading that in the background, it will run a script. And that script will automatically preload all these devices with a configuration that has intentional errors in it, intentional things that are broken. And then you have to go through this, and just like when you're taking the T-Shoot exam, the T-Shoot exam has tickets. Each ticket you have to do 3 things. Number 1, you have to identify which device had the problem. So like here, you have to identify which device has the problem. Then secondly, once you've done that, you have to answer another question. The problem was related to which technology? And you have to select one. Now in the actual T-Shoot exam, the third thing would be another multiple choice. You'd be given the question of, okay, which of the commands below would you type to fix the problem? Now in my troubleshooting workbook, I take it a step further. You have to fix the problem, not just identify a command. So the third thing here is, okay, fix it, and then you go back here, you select answer, and then you see, okay, this was the problem, and these are the commands you had to type to fix it. Now there may be other troubleshooting type workbooks out there. I'm not exactly sure how those would work because our workbook is all based on the premise that you're logging into our equipment. This is downloading pre-configs that have stuff that's already broken, and then you have to identify the problem and fix it. Maybe other companies have something similar, but that would be another way of preparing for troubleshooting is by doing something similar to that. It also, I have not looked for this, but it wouldn't surprise me if people have already created like packet tracer troubleshooting labs. Because with packet tracer, you can save your packet tracer file as a PKT file, and then you can share that with other packet tracer users. And when they open up that PKT file, it's already got the routers they pre-configured, the links they pre-configured, and the configurations. So somebody could very easily create something like this, a PKT file that has something that's intentionally broken in it that you have to solve, you have to figure out. I haven't found anything like that, but I haven't really looked seriously, so that probably exists as well. That would be another good way of doing troubleshooting. All right, let me scroll up a little bit here. A lot of good questions coming in. This is awesome. Let me see some of the older questions I haven't had a chance to address yet. As far as refreshing of the certifications, the CCNA, or what we call the CCNA version 3, that's not going to be refreshed for a while. I think that was refreshed lastly in 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And Cisco typically goes about 3 or 4 years between their updates of their exams. So I would not expect the CCNA to be updated for at least another year or two. 2019, 2020 is when I would expect to see a refresh of the CCNA. Now the CCNPs, those are coming due. The CCNP exams were last refreshed back in 2015, early 2015, and here we are in 2018. So I'm expecting any day to see on the CCNP forum an announcement that the CCNPs are going to be updated this year. Maybe next year, certainly no later than next year. But the nice thing about the refreshes that Cisco does is when they do come out with an announcement that a test is being updated, there's always a 6-month window. So it's not like, oh, I was just about to take my CCNP switch next week and now I can't take it, but now there's a new exam I got to study for. You don't have to worry about that. So when they do come out, like let's say, hypothetically, that they announced today that the CCNP route, switch, and T-shoot were going to be updated. Well, you'd have a 6-month window. So from today until, July, the middle of July of this year, you would have that 6 months to take the old exam before they went away, and you'd have to take the new one. Or during that 6-month window, you could study for and prepare for the new exam if you wanted to, but you would have that 6-month window. So for the CCNP, nobody officially knows, except for the people within Cisco who are creating the exams. No, there's been no word, there's no official announcement of an update, but I would expect the CCNP exams probably to be updated sometime this year or maybe early 2019 at the absolute latest. So I would be on the lookout for that. All right, so let's see here. What other questions can I address? Okay, what else? Just give me a moment here as I look through the questions. Somebody asked how to get a CCSI. I'll just address that briefly. So if I remember correctly, that acronym stands for Cisco Certified Systems Instructor. I think it's like, basically a CCSI is a certification you get that allows you to teach Cisco authorized courses. So if you went to work for a Cisco learning partner like Global Knowledge or some other company that teaches and offers Cisco official courses, they would probably want you to have a CCSI. So how do you get one? It's basically a two-step process. Number one, you have to have some company sponsor you. So for example, a lot of instructors who go to work for Global Knowledge will sponsor them to get their CCSI, because a CCSI is actually going to be associated not only to you and your name, but to that company that you're working for. So they have to sponsor you. And then you would go and you would sit in and like, I did this a long time ago. I got CCSI certified for like the ICND2 course. And what I had to do was for a week, I don't think it was a week, it was like maybe 3 days, I went and I sat in a room with some other potential instructors. And there was a guy at the front of the room who did a real high-level overview on the ICND2 technologies, real quick, wham-bam course on that. And then at the end of that, I had to pass the ICND2 exam myself to prove that I knew it, and we had to get up and give presentations to the other people in the room, and then that guy would sign us off saying, yep, he or she knows his stuff, they can present it well, and then that would be reported back to Cisco, and then you would get your official CCSI certification. So it's not really a technical cert, it's a cert that proves that you know how to teach it to other people. Let's see here, what else? Okay, so there's a question here earlier from Ryan. Is it true that when you pass any of the 3 CCNP exams on the way to getting the cert, it automatically renews your CCNA? Yes, that's true. That is true. Hold on a second, let me think about this. Because you have to have an active CCNA, a renewed CCNA, to even get your CCNP. They won't give you a CCNP certification unless you have an active CCNA. Let me get back to you on that one. I'll have to think about that, how that works. Because I know for a fact you cannot get your CCNP certification unless you have an active CCNA. And it would kind of not make a lot of sense if your CCNA is expired and then you go get the CCNP route or the CCNP switch and that activates your CCNA. That would sort of undo the whole requirement of having an active CCNA to begin with. So I'll have to look at that real quickly. And if somebody else on here has some experience with that, recent experience, and wants to comment on it, please do. Let's see. Question here, are there any questions on the CCNA routing and switching that I will have to type commands in a router simulator? Absolutely. There are router simulations in the CCNA exams, whether you're taking the ICND1, the ICND2, or you're taking the composite exam. Every once in a while you will run across router simulations where you have to type in commands to get something working or to fix something. So yeah, you should expect that. Now the quantity of router simulations you get will vary. As I've mentioned in like my CCNA kickoff series, and I don't know if you guys have seen any of those, I take the CCNA periodically just to refresh myself on what's in there, what the heavy hitter topics are, sort of the format of the questions. Sometimes I've taken it and I've only gotten one simulation, and that was it. Other times I've taken it and I've gotten as many as like 4 simulations. So I wouldn't expect to see any more than 4. You'll see somewhere between 1 and 4. Let's see here. Okay, good. Looks like some people responding back. Somebody responded back to Ryan saying they just passed the CCNP route and it did update for another 3 years their CCNA. All right, good. So that answered that question. All right, let me scroll down a little bit, hit some of the more recent questions here. All right, so somebody asked a question if non-native English speakers get additional time on the exams. I've not personally heard they do, but it looks like somebody else responded saying yes, they got an extra 30 minutes extra. So that's good to know. I've not read that anywhere on any websites that you get that, but it looks like somebody actually had that happen to them. So if anyone can let us know where that's documented, I would love to see that, because that's the first time I've heard of that. Let's see what other questions we have. When will frame relay be removed from the CCNP exam? Good question. And this is a very good point. So frame relay was removed from the CCNA exams back in 2016 when those were updated. So when you take your CCNA, don't have to know anything about frame relay. But absolutely, when you take your CCNP route exam, the current route exam, there's a lot of frame relay in there. And I took that exam just recently to see what was on it. And yes, there's a lot of frame relay in there. So, but the fact that they removed it from the CCNA is a pretty good indicator that they'll probably remove it from the CCNP route when the route gets refreshed. But don't bank on that. Don't guarantee it. I mean, until they actually come out with the route refresh, we won't know what's on there and what's not. All I can tell you is that right now, there is a sizable portion of frame relay in the CCNP route exam. And actually, I want to share with you guys, for those of you who have little or no experience with frame relay, a great resource I found to help you study for that. So if you go to Google and you type in this right here, troubleshooting frame-relay, here's a great document from Cisco, troubleshooting frame-relay connections. All right, so you'll want to go to that document. It's kind of an old document. It's got some errors pulling up here, so I would recommend you go to it right now or very soon and download it as a PDF, because it might go away at some point. A lot of times when I've noticed that when I pull up old Cisco documents that have like errors and stuff in the header, that's usually an indicator that that document is on its way out. But for now, it's available. I would definitely get a hold of this document, download as a PDF, and read through this. This will give you everything you need to know for frame relay technology on the current CCNP route exam. So you'll definitely want to go through. That's a great document for that, and I wanted to share that with you and make sure that you guys were available, that it still exists. So that's troubleshooting frame relay connections on Cisco's website. All right, so let's go back here. See a lot of good back and forth right now between you guys, not necessarily related to certification stuff, but other things, and that's great. This is a great forum to do that, to use that for. Okay, somebody mentions that when you book at Pearson VUE, the Pearson VUE website, it's documented that 30 minutes are additional if you're doing something that's not the official language of English. That's awesome. Let's actually just test that real quick. So I'm going to go to google.com. I'm going to type in Cisco CCNP route. All right, here's the route exam. And I'm going to register at Pearson VUE. Sign in. Okay, so from here, proctored exams. Let's just do this one, 300-101, implementing Cisco IP routing. Go. All right, I'm going to choose Japanese for that. Okay, so far there's no mention here of it being any more than 2 hours. Yes, I accept. Okay, let me just pick something here. I'll pick this location. Next. I guess I can't take it in Japanese here in the United States. Well, that kind of stinks. So I don't know. Maybe if you select English, but your location is not in the United States, maybe then you're given the option of, or you see that you're given 30 minutes extra. But I can't confirm that on my side here. But you can see normally it's a 2-hour test, and you get 45 to 65 questions within that 2 hours. All right, what other questions do we have coming in? A good question here from Joey. How much BGP knowledge is required for the route exam? I don't think route reflectors and confederations are on there. You're absolutely right. Route reflectors and confederations are not on the CCNP route. Very little BGP is on that exam. I don't want to give away anything and break the non-disclosure agreement. You know, BGP is part of the blueprint, but I would just advise you to spend more time on OSPF and EIGRP than BGP. That's about as far as I'll go with that, but there's not as much BGP as one might expect on that exam. BGP is used a lot in the real world, especially if you're working in an internet service provider. Absolutely, BGP is used. Even in enterprise customers, you know, when I worked at Cisco, one of the companies I worked with was General Electric. And General Electric had started out with EIGRP within their own internal network, but their own internal network had grown so huge that they were starting to have traceback messages and other problems because EIGRP could not scale. They'd gotten to about, at that time, about 5,000 routes in their own internal network, and EIGRP couldn't handle it at that point. And so even within their own internal network, they had to migrate to BGP in the core to handle their own internal routes. So BGP is used a lot. It's just that you're not going to be, from the routing and switching exams, you won't be really hit with BGP with any sizable quantity of questions until you get to the CCIE level. Now, I have not taken the CCNP service provider track. Service provider, I would expect the service provider track to introduce BGP and have a lot more BGP at the CCNP level. But for the CCNP routing and switching, oops, that's not good. Hold on. Okay, hopefully, can you guys still hear me there? Just knocked my wireless mic off the table. You guys still hear me all right? Hopefully the answer is yes. Okay, well, I think you guys can hear me. So yeah, not a lot of BGP there. Great, thank you. Let's see here. There is also a lot of IPv6 on the exams, and yeah, IPv6 is still in the minority in the real world, right? In the real world, most companies are still using IPv4, and IPv6 is starting to creep up. But I will show you one thing, which is kind of interesting. Let me go here, see if I can remember how to get to this. IPv6 internet usage. I'm just guessing here. Usage statistics, maybe this is it. There was, well, this is showing something. I saw just recently, you might have to search for Google, but I saw recently a website that showed of the percentage of people that were accessing Google via native IPv6 packets. And it was actually surprising. It was something like 20% of all searches done on Google are using native IPv6. And I would have thought it was a lot less than that. So IPv6 is definitely on the rise, and I will tell you, there's a significant portion of questions on the CCNP exams, especially the route exam, that deal with IPv6. So you don't want to skip IPv6 for certification purposes. Definitely want to know it. Definitely want to know it. Let's see here. What other questions can I answer for you? Are there any questions about MPLS in the CCNP exam? Nope, there are not. No questions about MPLS. Looks like Mikhail is about to give us some IPv6 stats. That's good. Let me also scroll up here and just see if there's any certification related questions. I have not seen personally questions regarding IPv6 subnetting in any of the exams. I would expect to see more of that when they do a refresh, but I did not see that. None of the routing and switching exams, either for CCNA or CCNP, cover Ethernet over MPLS. So that's not an exam. That's not a topic you would need to know for the CCNA or CCNP. That I would expect to see that more once again in probably a service provider track, like a CCNA or CCNP exams for service provider would most likely hit you with Ethernet over MPLS. I'm just scrolling up now to see if there's any questions that I have not had a chance to ask yet. Which practice tests would I recommend for the CCNA? So once again, I'm going to show you some resources that we have here at INE. I'm sure there's a lot of other stuff out there as well, but I just want to make you aware of what we've got in case you weren't aware of this. So if you go, and you don't have to be an INE member to see this, any of you guys can do this if you pull up another tab. If you go to streaming.ine.com, So let me expand this a little bit here. So if you go to streaming.ine.com, that's available to the public. And from there you can see all the courses we have. And in the search field here, if you just type in ICND, let me zoom in on this a little bit. You'll see that we have, let's see here, where is it? We've got some practice exams. Okay, let me scroll over a little bit more. Okay, so here in the far right column, there's the 200-105 ICND2 practice exam, and there's the 100-105 ICND1 practice exam. Now at this point, if you click on it, I think your availability to see it at this point will depend on whether or not you have access to this. Clearly, if you have an all-access pass, you'll have access to this, and most of our CCNA bundles have access to this as well. But these practice exams, for example, if I click on one right here, I tried to design these to give you as close of a actual testing experience as you would have when sitting down and taking the real test. For example, they are timed. So if you look here in the upper left corner, you'll see you're given 90 minutes for this, which is how much time you get on the real exam, and it's a countdown timer. You see what question you're on and how many questions you have to go. These are all multiple choice, either multiple choice single answer or multiple choice multiple answer. So I'm just going to randomly select one. It says select the best answer. All right, I'll just select this one, for example. I'll move on. I'll just do 2 or 3 just to show you. This says select the best answer. Okay, I'll select that one just randomly and select 2 answers. Okay, so let's just do that one and that one. Now let's say I'm done. Okay, I finish. Or maybe I don't have time to go through all 56 questions. And by the way, another thing that I tried to emulate with this is if you look in the blueprint, for example, the ICND1 blueprint or the ICND2 blueprint, and it'll say, okay, LAN switching technologies, that is 25% of the exam. Routing technologies, that's 23% of the exam. So as I created questions for these online practice exams, the questions are grouped as far as LAN switching, routing, network security, and you should get the same percentage. In other words, if on the real ICND1 exam, 26% of the questions are LAN switching, well here, 26% of the questions should also be LAN switching. So I tried to emulate that as well. So once you're done, or let's say you finish early, you can click End and Submit for grading. And you'll see here, well in this case I got absolutely everything wrong, but if you go to one here, for example, the red X means I got it wrong. If I click on that, you'll see what you selected, and you'll get a green check mark here to show you what the correct answer was. So we've got that for ICND1, we've got that for ICND2. We also have online practice exams for route and switch. And I'm sure there's a lot of other companies out there that also have practice exams as well. But I like ours, so I would definitely, advise you to check those out. Let's see here, what other questions do we have? Yeah, David Munoz, you have a very good question. How are you supposed to learn APIC EM if you can't access the program? Good question. Fortunately, once again, for certification purposes, APIC EM is not in the CCNP at all. So they introduce it at the CCNA, and then for CCNP, it's not there. Now, as far as the CCNA is concerned, technically speaking, you don't have to have actual experience with APIC EM to answer the questions within the CCNA. The CCNA just wants you to be exposed to what it is and what its capabilities are. And there's a few ways you can actually do that. It's been a while since, let me go ahead and go back to this again, but there is, let me see if I can find it here. There is something you can log on to that Cisco offers, where you can actually get a little bit of practice. Is it this one right here? No, this is not it. Let me see if I can find it real quick. APIC EM. Let's just try practice. Where is it? There is some part, I'd have to search for it again. I'm sorry I don't have it immediately available here. But there is some website that Cisco has where you can log in and then you can get into like a virtual server and you have some minimal things you can do with APIC EM in there. I wish I had that available right now. But if any of you guys have seen what I'm sort of referring to and can put in the link to that, that would be great. But for purposes of passing the CCNA, you don't have to practice it. Just read a couple of white papers on what it can do, look at some screenshots, and that will be good enough. All right, so let me scroll down here and see if there are any other questions. sandboxapic.cisco.com, that might be it. Okay, well, I don't know if I typed that in correctly or not, but that's not coming up right now. Oh, well, now this site can't be reached. All right, anyway. All right, so let's see. We've got a few minutes left here. Let's see, are there any networking or switching concepts that will be used less or not used at all after the prevalence of IPv6 grows to a significant size in usage? Well, first of all, that's probably not going to happen for at least a good 15 or 20 years. But let's flash forward 15 or 20 years into the future where IPv6 is becoming predominant and IPv4 is kind of going away, becoming the minority. Would there be any networking or switching concepts that would be used less or not at all? Well, subnetting, this whole concept of VLSM and how you subnet something based on the quantity of hosts, won't really have to worry about that once IPv6 becomes predominant. That's something that will go away. What else? You'll still have to know routing protocols and how they work. That carries over. LAN switching's not really going to change. There are some alternatives out there to spanning tree, especially in data center environments. There have been some alternatives to spanning tree that have come out, and those will probably gain more traction, but that has really nothing to do with IPv6. So off the top of my head, IPv6 doesn't have ARP, so once more and more hosts start using IPv6, you won't have to learn about ARP anymore. That does not exist. IPv6 has something that's called neighbor discovery that takes the place of ARP, and it operates completely differently. Can't think of anything else off the top of my head that might go away. Is the CompTIA's N+ and A+ required before getting your CCNA? No. You can be working in the food industry. You can be working as a payroll consultant and just start studying immediately for your CCNA. You don't have to get the A+ certification or any of those other CompTIA certifications. You can go right to your CCNA and start studying for that. How about NATing? How is that useful for IPv6? And I will relate this back to exams again. So one of the things the CCNP route exam will want you to know is that there are current technologies out there NAT technologies, so that if, for example, I had a host that was IPv6 only, and you're not going to see a lot of that right now, but let's just say theoretically my laptop only supported IPv6, and yet I want to reach a website that was IPv4, some web server that's IPv4. How would you do that? Well, the CCNP route exam will want you to be aware that there are a couple of different NAT technologies, NAT 64 and NAT PT v6. Those allow you to do that, to have a v6 host contact a v4 only host. Now, the CCNP route does not expect you to know the details of how that works, how you have to configure it, but at a high level, you should know what the differences are between NAT PT and NAT 64. Just some high-level differences between them, and you should know that they exist. But those technologies do exist for that. Let's see, what other questions here? We're winding down. We have a couple of minutes left. So let me just see if I can answer 3 or 4 more questions before we run out of time. I don't know anything about CCNA cyber ops, so I can't speak to that. So in the world of IPv6, just like in the, so I'm going to try to answer Internetwork Training's question here. As I know that all IP addresses are routable, then how do I know that public IPv6 addresses in the internet? So real quickly on that. In the world of IPv version 4, there are routable addresses, public and private, right? In IPv4, you have the 10 network, the 192.68 network, the 172.16 through 32 networks. Those are private networks. In other words, I can have those route in my own company, but if I send a packet to my service provider that has either a source or a destination of those networks, 10, 192.168, they probably have filters in place, and they will drop my packets because those are not globally routable. In the world of IPv6, something similar exists. But this is actually easier. In the world of IPv6, if you ever see an IPv6 packet with a source or destination address of either FC, that's Frank Charlie, or FD, that's Frank David, those are your private IPv6 addresses. Now, they don't call them private, they call them, I think, site local or unique local. But those are addresses that if they go to your service provider has filters in place that will not allow IPv6 packets going to or from FC or FD. Those are dropped. Those will be filtered out. Also, currently, any IPv6 packet that begins with the number 2 is a globally routable address. Now, there are some like 2002 that are reserved for special things, but the number 2, to anything, has been designated as a globally routable IPv6 address. So those are the ways that you can sort of differentiate between public addresses and private addresses in the world of IPv6. All right, so I think we have time here for one more question. I'm going to look for a certification-related question to end our day on here. Let's see. I'm just scrolling up through the questions right now, folks, just to see if there's any certification-specific questions I can answer that I did not reach already. Did I get any server questions in the CCNA? No. So at both the CCNA and the CCNP level, you don't have to know how to configure anything on a server. You don't have to know anything about Linux, anything about how to configure a DHCP server on a server. You should know that servers are a critical component to networking, and in some protocols like AAA with TACACS and Radius, you have to know how to configure the router or the switch to speak to the server, but you don't have to know how to configure the server or anything about how to configure server software. So with that, our time has come to an end. What about VPN in CCNP? The only VPN-related technology in the CCNP that you need to know is GRE tunnels. They want you to know how to work them, how to configure them, what the requirements are to get them to work. You should know about DMVPN. Once again, you don't have to know about configuration of DMVPN, but you need to know why it exists, what the benefits are, and what protocols are used within DMVPN. For example, you should know that DMVPN is reliant on multi-point GRE and the next hop resolution protocol, NHRP. You need to know that. So with that, there are no VPN and IPv6 topics within the CCNP. All right, so with that, we have sort of run over time here. I'm sure we'll have something like this again, like our CCNA kickoffs. This will probably be something that we do on a regular, frequent basis. But I hope today was useful to you. I hope this was a good learning experience for you. I hope most of you got your questions answered, and I appreciate all of your feedback. So good luck, everybody, and if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me. And otherwise, good luck on your exams. I wish you well. Have a good weekend, everyone.